Good morning. Today is the 21st of August and it's time for yet another very vague, not very interesting and probably factually incorrect vlog. I'm just off on my way to film another episode of No Budget Reviews, which majority of you will have seen by the time that this video is public. Obviously the channel members on the set Toledo membership tier and above get to see this video on the day that it's actually filmed, or very soon afterwards. The rest of you will have to wait a little bit. But I want to talk about something that is becoming quite apparent within a certain section of the classic car community, and that is the golden age of Vauxhall in the 1980s and 1990s. Lasted probably from around 1980 to about 1995. This was the time when Vauxhall were a hugely successful brand in this country, and I suspect as Opel, they were very successful in a lot of other places as well. But particularly in this country, rather like Ford, they were just everywhere. And it wasn't just the cars were cheap or they were plentiful or something like that. It was they were actually quite good. I have experience of this recently, and many of you will do, even have not watched any of the reviews that I've done, perhaps over the last year or so, of these Vauxhalls. I'm talking about things like the Mark II and Mark III Cavalier, the Mark I to III Astra, the Nova, the Corsa B, cars like that, the Senator, even maybe the Amiga B. Just tons and tons and tons of cars that were very influential, well designed, often practical, and often very cheap and easy to fix, and were beloved by generations of people. My father-in-law had many of these Vauxhalls in a row. It did help that he lived very near to Ellesmere Port, and he still does, and one of his Reds actually worked at the plant, so he would get a discount on every new Vauxhall that he bought, and obviously then my father-in-law would get that car after a few years. But just having driven things like the Mark I Astra, which was an 81, last year at the Great British Car Journey, and seeing just how advanced a car it was for that time, just leaps ahead of stuff like a Chevette or a Viva. Amazing, you know, really wonderful, smooth, new Family One engine, very easy to work on, very reliable if looked after properly, really light steering, nice gearbox, just a very modern design, very pleasurable to drive, not massively spacious inside, but bang up to date design, which was then improved, some would say, just a couple of years later with the Mark II Astra. Not exactly the same underneath, but very similar engines, same kind of idea, but probably in some ways an even bigger seller. The Nova, amazing production run of over 10 years, even more if you count the Opel Corsa version. And again, apart from the really quite terrible brakes on that, which I found out about when I drove an example earlier this month, you would have seen that in Sensible Second-Hand Classics. It's a very good car, quite dated by the time that the particular example that I drove was registered in 1991, with an engine that dated all the way back to, I think, the early 60s, that example, the base model. But just an agreeable car, like, you know, probably a kind of a bit of a smoother drive than a Mark II Fiesta, and just again sold in massive numbers. All these cars have had Achilles heels, such as rust and some other problems, and the security on them was really bad, particularly the Mark 1 and 2 Astras and Belmonts, as well as the Nova. Terrible security, but you know, there we go. Cavalier, I have yet to drive a Mark 2 Cavalier. I'd really like to drive a Mark 2 Cavalier, and of course if you do have one of those, or anything else about Mazda which fits into the brief of the channel, then I have an email address that I just displayed at the beginning of this video. So yes, Mark II Cavalier, revolutionary car. Just how competent it was when it came out in 1981. In many ways, the Sierra that was launched for next year was not as good. Having driven a Sierra myself, back to back with the Mark 1 Astra, I can say that was just a much heavier and more cumbersome car to drive, even with power steering. The Astra was very light and without any power steering at all. And the Sierra just a bit of a handful, and just wasn't very successful for quite a long time. With the Mark II Cavalier, very similar in terms of the interior design to the Astra and the Nova. Some of the same engines, particularly Family 1 engines that they used. Just a nice, competent car. I mean, terrible rust, terrible security, but that was the same for lots of cars at the time. And then the Carlton and the Senator, again, the one from the earlier 80s, is ones that came in 78, and then were facelifted around 82. It's really good, particularly the Senators and the Monza Coupe. Fantastic cars. A bit more complicated to sort of work on and things like that, but you know, obviously very much more expensive. The Senator B that came in after that, really good car. Really good, sort of a BMW rivaling levels of quality. And what happened is, where did it all go wrong? Some people point to the Vectra B. The thing is that the Vectra B was really heavily based on a Mark III Cavalier, the same platform, obviously revised extensively, and a lot of the same engines. And I just don't think it was a step forward enough. The Mark III Cavalier for me is a better car, even if I drove probably not the best version to really sort of demonstrate what it was like. 1.6 classic, run out special with the 1.6 engine, but only developed 75 horsepower. You know, not really the best. I really would like a sort of 2.5 CDX, something like that. But you know, nevertheless, I quite liked it, even though that sort of late run out specification. When I tested the Vectra B, which was actually, I think, before the Cavalier, I tested that, I just didn't like it as much. Loads of evidence of cost cutting, uncomfortable seats, styling that just, it was alright, but didn't really sort of move the game on particularly. It's just not good enough when you've got a class of cars, things like a Primera and a Mondeo. Just really, that's my opinion. A lot of people like them. Corsa, very good. Corsa B. Drove one of those set on No Budget Reviews. Actually, just a couple of months ago. 1995 1.2 Merit e-drive. Mr. Richardson, of course, has driven one of those. It was a bit of a higher specification than one he drove. I think you know heated seats in it. It's a really good car. Lots of shared components with the Nova, but a revolutionary car in terms of the design. Just really modern feeling for 1993 when it came out. Maybe not the sharpest drive, but it was absolutely fine. Much better than I remember it being when I took drive lessons in one many years ago. Then the Astra F Mark III. I drove one of those back in May, and actually I was astonished how good it was. Still a bit of cost cutting, still very evidently a fleet car, but just a very competent car, quite well made, quite spacious. Nothing sort of special in terms of the design perhaps and everything, but just a really competent car, in the same way that I don't think perhaps a lot of the more modern Vauxhalls have been. Astras G I gather was quite good, never driven one of those, but it seems like a sort of golden age, and people think back quite fondly of them. The biggest problem with these cars was sort of rust, depreciation, and also the fact that they were just everywhere. Like, people just didn't care about them, they just thought they were really boring. I think there's probably a lot of it to do with just the fact that they were everywhere. Obviously they had problems, everything has problems. But now people are starting to look quite fondly back on this era, particularly when a gentleman called Samuel won Festival of the Unexceptional last month with his Mark III Astra. It was a base model 1.4 Merit, I think it's a 94. And suddenly people realise that actually these cars are getting rare, and there is a nostalgia value attached to them, and maybe they weren't that bad after all. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video. I have mentioned channel membership before. There is a join button if you wish to become a member. I don't obviously feel you have to do that. And we'll see you again soon for more not particularly relevant music.